You're listening to INTERZONE Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley, and today I'm talking to Stark Holborn. Thank you for coming on the show, Stark.
It's my pleasure. So, hi, Gareth.
I wanted to start with your excellent, really interesting INTERZONE digital story, which was the Feast of Mulligan Lang. Could you kind of, introduce that a little bit for listeners who might not have read it and talk about maybe where that came from?
Yeah, sure. I'm so pleased that Mulligan found a home with INTERZONE, with IZ Digital, because I think it's a perfect home for the story. And obviously, your help with it was greatly appreciated too. But the idea for Mulligan first came from, so some readers will probably know this, there's a Lord Dunsany story called The Coronation of Mr. Thomas Shapp. And it's one of my favourites. It's about a man who has a very dull existence as a clerk in London, and then gradually he sort of starts building these flights of fantasy in his mind and retreating further and further from reality as he does, into this sort of fantastical world where he eventually becomes a god, and it's all happening in his imagination. And I loved the way it, by increments, he slowly loses himself, and I kind of wanted to do something similar with that. And obviously, but combining a lot of other elements as well from other things into that sense of growing kind of wonder and horror.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, growing wonder and horror is exactly right. Yeah, and it's been nominated or not. Is it nominated or just longlisted? I forget. It's been longlisted or nominated for the long list at the British Science Fiction Award.
It has, yeah.
So, if you are a member, please do take a look at it, and if you like it, vote for it, because that would be fantastic. That would,
be brilliant. And I think it's free to read at the moment as well, if you want to go and check it out.
It is, yeah, it is. If you go to interzone.digital, and it should be very near the top, unless I've done something wrong, which I sometimes do. But it should be there. It should be, scroll down a little bit, and you should see it. And you've also recently, well, I think coming out very soon, there's this game. There's this game, Shadows of Doubt.
That's right. Yes, Shadows of Doubt. It's I've been working on it as a writer for probably the past nearly 3 years, I think.
Wow.
But it's been in development for probably 6, so I've been involved for about half its life cycle.
Okay, and this is it's a stealth detective game with a kind of a narrative, sort of like talk a little bit about it, because the narrative is quite interesting, right? Your involvement is in this sort of, is it procedurally generated narrative, or?
Yeah, well, this is the fascinating thing about it as a game. It's sort of, so it's a stealth game, but it's also an immersive sim in a lot of ways. So really it's up to the player to interact with the world how they see fit. And in this case, you're a classic gumshoe detective trying to solve murders and take on side jobs and interact with this sort of shady, dystopian, alternative 1980s city. And what's amazing about it, and I think what makes it quite unique in the space, is that when we say procedurally generated, like everything is procedurally generated, from the city names, the citizens who live within the city. They'll all have a name, a job, a routine, likes, dislikes. They'll have favourite bars they go to. They'll have a blood type, a footprint. And then also the city's constantly tracking their movements as well. So if you're looking for someone, you can look on CCTV and you'll be able to see them walking around as you would if you were a real detective. And so it's brilliant fun. And one of the challenges was trying to work a sense of narrative into procedural generation. And it was quite challenging. You sort of have to modularize a lot of things because you never quite know what order they're going to come out in. But I think we've got it working really well. And one of my favourite aspects of it are actually the newspapers. And so you can pick up a newspaper and, you can read about a crime that's happened the day before, and it will all generate based on what's been happening in the city.
Oh, that's amazing. So you can kind of get a kind of clue or a hint from a newspaper and then follow it up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You can read about, who found a body or where it was found, who the person's neighbour was. And then you can there's other ridiculous things in there that I love. There are classified adverts, and one of the great things for me about this was just getting so much world building, because we don't really have a way for to info dump anything on the player. It all has to be sort of seeded throughout the world, and so there's world building built into everything. Item descriptions. If you pick up a bottle of ketchup, it's got some world building in there.
That's fantastic. Is it an overarching narrative? Is there sort of like as a writer, are you thinking about it in terms of some big sort of plot, or are you just sort of plotting out, short stories or sort of smaller stories inside this world?
I won't talk too much about this because obviously it hasn't released yet, the game. It should be coming out sometime this year. But it is a real challenge, and at the moment the main overarching narrative is actually sort of the tutorial. It's the introductory mission, but after that a lot of things are proceduralized, and we're always talking about the fact we want to do like DLCs and adventures, and so I mean maybe there'll be room for other stuff later, but that's very much sort of a dream for now.
Talking about world building, 10 Low, I've got a great quote here from Alex White, and they say the most vibrant desert world since Dune. And I wondered sort of how did that 10 Low world come about, and how does HEL'S EIGHT relate to it? Relate to the novel, and sort of where does it sit inside the world?
All right, I'm going to make a confession, and I don't always tell people this, but so my first novel is actually a book called Nunslinger, which is in many ways a traditional Western in the sense that it's set in, the 1860s, but it's very much not a traditional Western in a lot of ways. It's very revisionist. It's kind of not quite alternate history, but it basically plays with the genre quite a lot. And it's a genre I'm absolutely fascinated by. But I'm aware that it's quite a hard sell sometimes, especially for people who assume that all Westerns are just sort of like John Wayne vehicles where he struts around and is macho. So I was thinking, well, how can I combine it with another genre? And then I started kind of thinking about, okay, well, what about science fiction? And it was actually on the way back from Dublin, from Worldcon, I sort of half fell asleep and then was thinking about this idea. And then it was the characters who came to me first. It was 10 and the General. And then I started thinking about, if they were interacting in a sort of desert-like environment, then that produced the sort of desert moon and then their journey across it. And so the world of Factus was really shaped by their interaction with it as characters. And also it was shaped, a lot of world building, you create something based on, what is there. And with Factus, I kind of wanted to explore creating a world based on what isn't there, what isn't present, and how people make their home and how people exist in that environment.
Then the novel kind of does really well. It was one of those pandemic releases, right? Which is
right in the middle, 2021. It was summer it came out.
Yeah. How did it affect it? How did it sort of, and also your expectations of the release? Like sort of, I imagine you were writing it before and then it comes out in the midst of it. Yeah,
difficult. Expectation-wise, I didn't really have a lot, to be honest, because it was new for me, and I was a sort of new voice in the science fiction space, so it wasn't something I had kind of huge expectations for. I think what was difficult was obviously not able to sort of have a proper launch and go into bookshops, and I did a bit of that, as much as I could, but I think overall one of the great things about doing stuff online, there was so much goodwill from the genre community during the pandemic in terms of helping to spread the word and get in touch with reviewers. So I felt really supported by that. But I think overall I was just happy to have my weird kind of space book out there. And it's been really fun kind of stepping into science fiction.
And for HEL'S EIGHT, it's I think you described it, I think it was in a tweet or it was somewhere, as maybe it's somewhere else as well, but as a standalone follow-up as opposed to just calling it a sequel. Is that kind of partly marketing, partly the way you were writing it, or is there more to that? Because I think it's a really interesting phrase, a really interesting way of putting it, a standalone follow-up.
I mean, the honest answer probably is that I think a lot of it is in the marketing, the way it's presented. I think booksellers sometimes will shy away from something if they think it's a sequel. I think people will assume there won't be new readers coming to a book because they think, oh, well, I have to read the first one first. And then, so I guess a standalone follow-up is a way of bringing people into the world without kind of making the demand that they have to, go away and read an 80,000 word novel before they can get into the second one. So it is an interesting concept. And I'm not going to lie, it was incredibly challenging to do because I obviously had an idea of what I wanted to do as a sequel, but then I also had to try and make it accessible for people who are coming to Factors for the first time and didn't know Ten's backstory and didn't know the general. So it caused me some problems, but I think we got there in the end.
There's a short story on your site as well, isn't there? Is it set in the same world? Is that right?
Yes, so the short story is called Snake Eyes, and interestingly, this is one of the ways I solved this problem in the end. That one's set about 30 years before the action of Tenlo. And after writing that, it actually features a character who I really liked from Tenlo called Esterhazy. She's this old, kind of quite dangerous, mysterious smuggler. And that made me think, I'd really like to explore her story further. So actually what happened is that original story has actually, I spun it out into a second strand of the novel. So the novel actually does jump between different viewpoints. One of them's Ten's, one of them's Esterhazy's. So if you like that story, then it's expanded upon in detail in the novel.
So Tenlo is available now, and HEL'S EIGHT is coming out on
the 21st of March and the 28th of March in the US.
And you've got a little bit of HEL'S EIGHT that you can read for INTERZONE Pod listeners.
I do, yes. If you hear the rustling, that's me opening one of my brand new shiny copies that arrived not long ago, which is always an exciting moment.
A big box of nice shiny looking books.
Yes, I know. Lovely Spot UV on the cover.
Oh, I'm a big fan of Spot UV, as anyone who has their copy of INTERZONE may know.
Everyone knows.
It does look very shiny. So you have something from HEL'S EIGHT, and go for it.
I do. So this is a short chapter. It's from near the beginning of the book, and it'll hopefully just give a flavour of the world. And this is from Ten's point of view. I wake abruptly, as if someone has yelled in my ear. Motionless, I listen. The night is quiet, save for the clink and clatter of the trinkets on the tree, the flap of the tarpaulin that covers the mule, the distant roar of the edge. There are no boots scuffling in the dust, no propellant on the air, no clacks or creaks of an ambush. Rowdy stands silently with his head against the wall, oblivious to any presence. And yet, I know, on the other side of the door, someone is watching. Slowly, I push back the ex-army blanket. No telling what time it is. The fire in the stove is almost out, just embers in thick coats of ash. I shake them awake, force the last feeble beats from their red hearts. The wind gives a moan, works its fingers through a gap in the walls to trace my throat. I take up the scalpel and, inch by inch, push open the door. At the light's limit, she waits, her grey hair caught like wool on the wind of another time, another place. perhaps even the wind that buried her body. "Esterhazy?" I whisper. The dead woman looks at me with eyes that first opened on old earth. She is alone. Not alone. They are with her. I can feel their attention on me, not eyes. They don't have eyes. I try to stay calm, to keep my hands from trembling, even as every nerve in my body screams for me to slam the door and bury my head under the blanket. "What is it?" I ask. Esterhazy opens her mouth to speak, but all that emerges is dark sand pouring past her teeth. I know that sand. I've walked endless dunes of it, through the edge, through hell. She opens her mouth wider, and the trickle becomes a rush, revealing something silver on her tongue. A coin. That's the first time I've actually ever read from that, so thank you for allowing me my debut performance of HEL'S EIGHT.
Thank you. That was wonderful. That was really, really cool. So that's HEL'S EIGHT, and we've talked about Mulligan, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your Patreon and your love of film, because I love film too, and you've got this great you do these recommendations, and I think you kind of like a lot of Western films as well, right? What have you been watching recently that's sort of stuck in your mind?
I'm just always hunting out, because I think part of the problem with streaming services is that there's so much there, but it's really difficult to find, things that you actually are maybe interested in. And, there's all the same recommendations on the front page. So I spend a lot of my time trawling through sites to find interesting recommendations. Things I've watched recently. There was a great one which I watched the other day called One Cut of the Dead, which is a Japanese zombie film, but narratively it's incredibly playful and unexpected, and I love anything that surprises me. That one was quite surprising, so I'd recommend checking that one out. It's kind of a comedy zombie horror, but it's definitely not what you think it's going to be. And then another recommendation I would have for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, there's a brilliant Western series on BBC iPlayer. It's called The English, with Emily Blunt and Jessica Spencer, and it is excellent. It's everything I hoped it would be. And I didn't watch it for a while because I was a bit worried that I wouldn't like it. But I think Maria Lewis, who I follow, she's a really interesting journalist. She said, a lot of revisionist Westerns don't actually revise an awful lot of the genre.
That's a great line.
It's great. I know, and it's totally true. It's totally true. They're revising very little, but this one actually does. It manages to be incredibly touching and poignant and just full of adventure and great characters. And I loved it, and it kept me guessing as well, which anything that does that narratively, I'm a huge fan of.
And what about sort of you seem to have quite kind of broad interests in terms of film, and you mentioned writing a Western that became a sort of science fiction Western. What about your reading habits? Are you sort of in multiple genres, or do you not kind of think about it very much? And what are you reading at the moment as well?
Well, I try to read. I read quite widely. I mean, I read what I'm interested in, so I don't particularly think about genre. I mean, saying that, a lot of Tenlo and HEL'S EIGHT is influenced by classic sci-fi, not necessarily the Asimovs and stuff. More, I'm a huge fan of the Strugatsky brothers, and so if you've read any, there's a lot of. It's a book called Hard to Be a God, and there's a lot of that made its way sort of into my thinking about Tenlo. And then a book called The Doomed City, which is one of my recent reads, which I don't think that was actually translated until about 2016. So that was one of my sort of recent favourites as well. I think, and they wrote, for people who don't know, they wrote Roadside Picnic, which became Stalker. So yes, that kind of classic sci-fi. And then Ursula Le Guin, Dispossessed, is one of my favourites. That's kind of where I come from on the sort of sci-fi track, as it were.
And when those influences come in, are they things that you notice when you go back and start revising? Is it sort of subconscious, or are they do you kind of see it as you're writing it?
No, I think a lot of it is, I mean, I can't tell you exactly how Hard to Be a God is in the book. I just know it was one of the influences, if that makes sense. It's kind of, I think, I was talking to someone the other day and they sort of mentioned the term sort of creative compost. You kind of compost a load of ideas together and then something blooms out of it. So it's just there. It's in the mulch that made up the book. That's
wonderful. Creative mulch. That's that's beautiful. I like that a lot. That's really great.
And it's fun because there's a lot of other things in there. So, in the 10 Lows Creative Mulch, there's, the Strugatsky brothers, there's Mad Max, there's Halo Jones, Firefly. It's kind of, you mush it all up together and see what comes out.
Okay. And before we go, is there anything else you want to plug, anything you're looking forward to, or anything you want to kind of give a little bit more exposure to?
And yeah, just in terms of other books I've read recently and that are coming out in the next few weeks, I would encourage everyone to check out a book called The 10% Thief by Lavanya Lakshmi Narajan, which is coming out from, I think it's Rebellion. I loved it. And it's a brilliant mosaic novel set in Bangalore. It's sort of dystopian future Bangalore, and it was one of my favourite reads of recent times. So if you're looking for a book in the next few weeks, that's one I definitely recommend.
So thank you very much. That's great. And you had something else, I think.
Oh, yes. I mean, if anyone's interested in regular film recommendations, in interactive fiction, because I do post a fair amount of sort of interactive fiction work in progress, and then in reading secretive behind-the-scenes work of stuff I'm doing, you can sign up to my Patreon, where I sort of post quite a lot of things that I don't put anywhere else online. And I'm just about to post a sneak peek of the third Triggernometry novella, which I haven't talked about at all, but I've just finished the third one and I'm about to post a sneak peek of that.
Triggernometry, great title and really beautiful art, because you Patreons can get the first two books as perks, right?
Oh yes, yeah, the different tiers, depending on which you sign up on, you'll receive them free.
So can you introduce Triggernometry and maybe hint a little bit about the third one?
Yeah, so Triggernometry, a bit like Nunslinger, I hate to say it, but it was title first, story second. So we were joking around and someone said, Triggernometry, it would be a Western, and then, what if the mathematicians were outlaws and gunfighters? And me being me, I thought, okay, well, I'll just go away and write that then, which I did. And they're just a lot of fun. They're kind of as silly as they sound and a lot less silly as they sound, in kind of equal measure. But, I've got, in the first one, I've got characters like, Pierre de Fermat, and I've got Emmy Noether, and just loads of Sophie Germain, basically mathematicians from across history, if they were all living at the same time, and if they were sort of outlaw gunfighters and gunslingers in a world where maths has been banned. Maths and sciences are outlawed, and experts are frowned upon and dismissed. Oh, I don't see any parallels at all with our current society here. But they're kind of quite ridiculous, but also as always, I end up exploring some things that are troubling me about whatever's going on. So the first one is very much a sort of heist, like train heist type setup. The second one is based on it's a kind of riff on Seven Samurai or the Magnificent Seven. And this latest one is I'm not going to give too much away, but I'll just say there's a casino involved.
Oh, okay. A casino, and you have to leave the rest. People will have to buy the book. Where is that available? Is that, who's publishing that, or where can people find it?
It's not available yet. So it should, all being well, come out sort of midway through this year. I'd say early summer, and I'm publishing it. I self-publish these ones in English. They're actually published in Spanish by a press called El Transbordador, who are brilliant. But yeah, self-published in English, which is quite fun because I get to commission the beautiful covers.
Right. Who's the artist for those? Because they're really pretty.
Oh, he's great. He's called Philip Harris. So if you look up Philip Harris illustration, you'll find them. He actually did the cover for Nunslinger back in the day, so we've worked together for a while.
Nunslinger was on my to be read. I'm looking at it right now, and it has a gorgeous cover. It's a beautiful paperback. It's a real chunky.
It is chunky.
Nice looking book.
It's 180,000 words in there.
Is it that?
And I wrote them all in 9 months.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's a beast. That's a beast. I'm glad you mentioned the Spanish edition because that's got a great translated title, isn't it? Is it Square of Lead?
Oh, it's brilliant. It's Plomo al Cuadrado, which is lead squared, which is just genius. I'm almost jealous because I'm like, that's better than trigonometry. God. And then the next one is lead cubed. So just great translation. This
is great. Well, okay, so we've got lots of things there. So the Patreon is, can you give the URL?
It's just patreon.com. I think it's /Stark Holborn, I think. Basically, I'm Stark Holborn on everything. You can find me. Just
search for Stark Holborn Patreon, and there are multiple tiers there. And you get nice goodies like I think at the highest tiers you get stickers and PDFs and.
Yeah, you get a signed first edition author copy of whatever I have that comes out. You get your name in the back of the acknowledgements of the book. So yeah, there's a fair amount to have, and I'm just signed off on some merch, some HEL'S EIGHT merch, which will be going up as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of that. I'm sure people will check it out, and you can find the Feast of Mulligan Lang is on interzone.digital, and you can find out more about Interzone, the print magazine, at interzone.press. And thank you very much, Stark, for coming on the show.
Thanks, Gareth. It was my pleasure.